We're going to talk about solving exponential equations when we cannot get the bases the same. Your classwork yesterday, the first couple problems on there, you could actually get the bases the same. But what if we can't get the bases the same? We looked at a problem like this a couple days ago, 2 to the x equals 10. And we spent some time in our calculator trying to guess and check and guess and check. Some of us got really, really close, but in order to get it accurate enough, you would have to take it out to like 9 or 10 decimal places. And after about 10 minutes, we had like 3 or 4 decimal places. But what we can do is we can actually rewrite this as a logarithm, log base 2 of 10 equals x. And that is the solution to that equation. What is that exponent? Whatever log base 2 of 10 is equal to. And then we can type that in the calculator. We talked about on Wednesday how to type this in the calculator. We wanted log base 10 on top and then log 2 on the bottom. And we can type that in the calculator. And that would have given us that exponent accurate to 8, 9, how many ever decimal places our calculator will give us. And that was accurate enough at that point. So that's kind of the idea today. We're not going to be able to get these bases the same. So we want to isolate the exponential expression. That's the base and the exponent. We're going to rewrite that as a logarithm. At this point, you should feel pretty comfortable taking an exponential and rewriting it as a logarithm. And then maybe x is by itself. Maybe x is not by itself. We're going to get x by itself, type a whole bunch of stuff in the calculator, and we will be done. If we look at number 1, what is the exponential piece? The 10 raised to the x plus 5, that is the exponential piece. That's what we want to get by itself. And in order to get that by itself, the 15 has to be moved to the other side. So we're going to subtract 15 from both sides for this first example. 225 minus 15 is 210. Now that the exponential piece, the base and the exponent are together by itself, nothing else except the base and the exponent on the left, we can now rewrite this as a logarithm. So we're going to rewrite this as a log. The base is 10, and remember the logarithm and the exponential are just inverses of each other. So we're using this inverse property of exponentials to help us solve this equation. So the x plus 5, which is the input, and the 210, which is the output, those are going to switch places. The 210 ends up over here on the left, and the x plus 5 on the right. We can get x by itself by subtracting 5 from both sides. Subtract 5 from both sides. What would you type in your calculator at this point? At this point, since it is a base of 10, there is a base 10 button on your calculator, and it's just the log button. So you're just going to hit the log button. You don't need to do the fraction thing like we did a second ago, because the base is 10 and the log button has a base of 10. And we're going to put 210 inside that parentheses. Again, what is on your screen should look the same as what's on my screen. How I type it in might look a little bit different because this is a different calculator than you guys have. But the screen should look identical. And then we want to subtract 5 from both sides. So we subtract 5 outside of the parentheses. I can't do 210 minus 5 and then type 205 in, or do 210 and not close the parentheses and do minus 5 and close the parentheses after. That's not going to work. So log 210 minus 5 is what we want to type in the calculator. We're going to round this to the 4th decimal place. So we're going to look at the 4th decimal place, which is 7. And the next number is an 8. So that 7 is getting rounded up because the next number is 5 or higher. So negative 2.6778. Negative 2.6778 is equal to x. Anytime the base is a 10, just use the log button. You don't need to do like log over log. We don't need to do that. Just hit the log button. Any questions about number 1? Any questions about number 1? We're actually gonna do the one on the right. I know it says number 3, but we're gonna do it first. And then we'll come back down to number 2. Just makes sense to do this one next. We have 8 times e to the 7x equals 73. You're like, why is there 2 letters in this equation? E to the 7x is the exponential piece. So that's what we're trying to get by itself. Remember, e is this number that we talked about Wednesday. And e is approximately 2.71828 ... E is a number like pi, represented by a letter because we can't write down every single digit of that number. So we use a letter to represent it. In this case, we're using E. Euler's number, Euler started with an E, so that's likely why he used E for this number. The 8 is being multiplied by the E, so in order to undo that, we have to divide by 8 on both sides. So we get e to the 7x equals 73 over 8. I would not type the 73 over 8 in the calculator yet because I don't want to round more than once. We don't want to round now and then round again later and then round again later. And then by the time we get to our final answer, it's not even close to what it's supposed to be because we rounded at all these intermediate steps. We only want to round once. So the best way to do that is just type everything in the calculator at the end when we get to the end. We can rewrite this as a logarithm now because the base and the exponent are by itself. So when we rewrite this as a log, the base is e. The 73 over 8 and the 7x are going to switch places because this is the inverse of the exponential. Log base e, is there a log base e button on your calculator? Yes, there is. Log base e is the natural log. So I'm going to change this to ln. So that's the button you should be looking for on your calculator at the moment, is that ln button. It should be right below the log button or right above the log button, depending on what calculator you have. And that's equal to 7x. We want to get x by itself. So we would divide by 7 on both sides. Notice I didn't type anything in the calculator until the very last step. And that's what I would encourage you to do. Like if you get like 5 plus 2 and you know 5 plus 2 is 7, just write 7. But if you need a calculator, just probably don't type in the calculator. Adding and subtracting is okay. But when you start dividing, don't divide until that very last step. So what can we type in the calculator for this? You can hit the fraction button. On your calculator, we're going to hit the ln button and maybe hit the fraction button again. And we're going to do the 73 over 8 inside the parentheses. And then we divided all of that by 7. We divided all of that by 7. Your calculator probably looks a little bit different, but what you type in should look exactly the same. So ln, 73 over 8, all over 7. 0.3158. The 8 is going to be rounded to a 9 because of the 5 after the 8. So 0.3159. So x equals 0.3159. And this is if we can't get the bases the same. If we can get the bases the same, we would likely do it the way we did earlier in the week. Likely do it the way we did earlier in the week. All right, 2 more. Number 2, we have 3 times 5 raised to the 4x plus 5. Our first goal is to get the exponential by itself. That's the 5 raised to the 4x. We're looking at where the exponent is. So that base and that exponent we want by itself. Otherwise, I can't rewrite it as a logarithm. We want everything else on the other side of the equal sign. So in this case, we're going to subtract 5 first. I know what 91 minus 5 is, so we can go ahead and do that. I didn't have to round anything. Like 91 minus 5 is 86. I didn't round anything, so that's okay. And now the 3. Common mistake, they see the 3, and you're like, oh, maybe I need to subtract 3. And it's normally not this that they make mistakes with. It's the if it were a negative 3. But we don't subtract 3 here. This 3 is being multiplied. So in order to undo multiplication, we have to divide. In order to undo multiplication, we have to divide. So we get 5 raised to the 4x, which is that exponential piece. The base in the exponent is now by itself. And that's equal to some number, whatever 86 over 3 is. If I were to type 86 over 3 in the calculator, I would likely have to round, so I'm not going to type it in the calculator yet. I will try to wait till the very end. We can rewrite this as a logarithm. The base is going to be 5. The 86 over 3 comes to the left, and the 4x goes to the right. The 4x goes to the right. And we do have to divide both sides by 4. I'm not going to do that just yet, because maybe when I start typing this in a calculator, maybe we make a mistake, because most of your calculators do not have a feature where you can change the 10 to a 5, or you can put the 5 in the base. Most of your calculators don't have that feature. So how would I type the left side in the calculator? I'm just going to write that out. You don't have to write it out on your paper, but I'm just going to write it out so we can see what it would look like. We get log 86 over 3 on top, and we get log 5 in the denominator. We have to do that because we cannot type the base of 5 in most of your calculators. There are calculators out there that will allow us to do that, but the ones that most of you guys have do not. And now we can divide by 4 on both sides. But this left side, if I divide by 4, notice that's 2 fractions, which is okay. You can type it in the calculator that way. But if we type it in the calculator incorrectly because of the fractions, we're not going to get the right answer. So my recommendation is maybe not use an extra fraction bar there, but actually just hit divided by 4 on the outside of that first fraction. And that might be my recommendation for you. Can you type it all in the calculator at one time? Sure. What would it look like if you typed it all in the calculator at one time? I'll show you what it looks like before we get the fraction button. I'm going to hit log 86 over 3 on top. 86 over 3 on top. And log 5 on the bottom. And then out to the side, I'm going to hit divided by 4. That's one way to do it. The correct way to use fractions, I would hit the fraction button first. If you want to type this all in at one time, and instead of doing the divide by 4 off to the side, I would recommend go ahead and put the 4 in the denominator first. And now in the numerator, I'm going to need a second fraction in the numerator. So go back to the numerator and hit the fraction button again. And notice those lines are actually different lengths. So the short line needs to be on top. The longer line would need to be on bottom in this case. And then we can do the log 86 over 3. I'm not going to hit the fraction button for that again, but I could have. And then log 5. And notice we get the same answer. But if you do mix up like that short line and that long line for the 2 fractions, and you put the long line on top and the short line on the bottom, it'll look very similar to that, but you'll get the wrong answer. So just make sure you type it correctly in the calculator. I don't care how you type it in the calculator, but it does have to be typed in correctly to get the correct answer. What it would look like if we typed it in incorrectly. I'm going to hit the fraction button. I'm going to go ahead and type the log 86 over 3 on top. Log 86 over 3 on top. I'm going to go to the bottom. And like, maybe I think it doesn't matter. And I hit the fraction button again, and then we're going to have log 5. And then we're going to have the 4. So it looks very similar. But notice the short line is on the bottom now instead of on the top. And I'm not going to get the same answer because I put the little fraction in the wrong spot. So those are way different. And make sure we don't do that one. So 0.52125. The 5 is going to round to 2 to a 3. So x equals 0.5213. 0.5213. And last one, very similar to the one we just did. It's actually got one extra step in there. So if you can do number 4, I got a pretty good feeling you can do any of them that I might give you on a quiz or test. We got to get the exponential by itself, the exponential being the 2 and the 4x plus 1 in the exponent. So we have to add 2 to both sides first. -3 times 2 raised to the 4x plus 1 equals -96. A very common mistake at this point is to say, oh, it's -3, so I need to add 3 to both sides. That's a mistake. Because that -3, we're not actually subtracting 3. That's a mistake. So don't do that. What should we do instead? This -3 is actually being multiplied by the 2. And in order to undo multiplication, we 100% need to divide, not add. That's a common mistake. I've seen several people make that mistake in their classwork today, even though I told you not to, like just now. Some people are still trying to add 3 or add 4, whatever the number is, instead of dividing by that number. So we get 2 raised to the 4x plus 1 equals a negative divided by a negative is a positive. So I'm going to drop the negatives. And now we have an exponential equation in which the exponent piece and the base are by itself. And we can rewrite this as a logarithm. We're using that inverse property of exponentials and logarithms, really to get this exponent out, the variable out of the exponent. The 96/3 ends up on the left, and the 4x plus 1 on the right. I really wish we could type a base of something other than 10 or E in your calculators, because it would make things a lot easier, but we can't. So what would we type in the calculator here? We would type log what's inside the parentheses on the top, and log of the denominator, the base, log 2. So that's what the left side would be equal to. But then I have to subtract 1 and divide by 4. So we're going to subtract 1 from both sides. So we get -1, and that equals 4x, because we subtract the 1 from both sides. And then we have to divide all of that by 4. And how can you type this in the calculator? Several different ways you can type this in the calculator. We can do one big fraction. One big fraction, it would look like that. Or I'm going to show you something else you can do. If like, man, I'm scared I'm going to type this in wrong. What else could we do and avoid this big fraction? So I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. Let everybody get that written down. And then I will switch to the calculator screen. I might can switch to the calculator screen and see both of them at the same time. Smaller, maybe. There we go, that works. All right, so what might you want to type in the calculator? Let's hit the fraction button first. And let's type the log. And then hit the fraction button again, 96/3. Close that parentheses. I can't make this any bigger, by the way. I tried this screen. I can't make any bigger. And then let's put log of 2 in the denominator. We can hit enter. And as long as we don't round, it'll be okay. So we hit enter. We get 5. I know, like, you can't round 5. It's just 5. But if it were one of the big long decimals, like 8.3404, whatever, we can just hit -1 and hit enter again. So it's going to take our previous answer, not rounded, and subtract 1 from it. And then we want to take that final answer there, the one we just got, and if I just hit the divide button, it should pop up A and S. Divided by 4 is 1. So we do get x equals 1. Or you can type it all in at one time, one big fraction. Make sure the short line's on top. Make sure the -1's on top, but not inside the little fraction here. And make sure the 4 is all in the denominator. And if we type that all in the calculator at one time, we will get the right answer. So I would hit the fraction button first. I would definitely recommend putting the 4 on the bottom first, and then hitting the fraction button again in the numerator. And then we get the log 96/3. the log of 2. If we do type this all in correctly, the -1 is in top of the fraction, but outside of this fraction. If we type it all in at one time correctly, we will get the correct answer. But you have to make sure you type it in all at the same time correctly. If we put fractions in the